What's up, everybody? We made it to the end of 2023. This is going to be the last episode for this year of the podcast. I am your host, as always, Peter Whittam. You can find myself in this podcast at Parlswip.com. Don't worry, it's not the last episode of the podcast ever. This podcast will be continuing into 2024. However, I feel like it's an appropriate time to look back upon the year in general, really. And first of all, I want to say thank you to all the other podcasters out there. I know that some more of the podcasts recently have been shutting down, for better way of putting it. And it always makes me sad when we lose great podcasters and great episodes and shows to listen to. But I fully understand. It is very difficult to keep doing a podcast for any length of time. And it does require a lot of time and effort and resources. So a big shout out and thank you to all the other podcasters out there. You are fantastic, and I greatly appreciate the content you put out. Thank you. On that note, I do want to look at where I'm going next year, I think, with a lot of these things. Like I say, I do plan to continue the podcast. It has been tough recently to get episodes out on a regular basis because I've had a lot of work things to do, and of course, it's holiday season and the end of the year, but I have every intention of continuing this podcast into 2024. I have been lucky this year. My goal at the beginning of the year, funny enough, I have absolutely destroyed my goal. I was looking to get maybe 2 more interview episodes done this year. I forget how many there are at this time, but there is way more than 2. I have been phenomenally lucky that everybody I have asked to come on the show has said yes, and they have all been absolutely fantastic guests. So thank you to all of my guests this year. You have really made it a truly fascinating year for me to be able to sit down and talk with you on many different subjects, from AI to code tools, coding, apps, developer lifestyle, developer life, mental health, all of these things that I consider to be absolutely vitally important. And on that note, that's why I want to mention also that there have been shows that have not been directly related to the Swift programming language, because it's about more than that, right? Yes, the Swift programming language is what we primarily use and cover on this show and as Apple developers now, but it's so much more than that. And at the core of it, my focus has always been to focus down on developers themselves and everything we need to keep ourselves in the right space to do our work. So thank you to everybody for that. Looking at other things this year, we get all the usual releases from Apple as far as tools and operating systems and all of those kind of things, and new hardware. And it's been another one of those years that's felt progressive in many ways. But next year, of course, is going to be a big year. And it's going to be a big year, I think, in the Apple ecosystem in many interesting ways. Now, first of all, let's start with the big one, right? Rumor is that we are going to be seeing the headset around February time, the Vision Pro. We'll see what happens there. I still don't know how that's going to play out. Of course, there'll be lots of interest, but I don't think it's going to be as mainstream as, all of Apple's other hardware. And I feel like that's not their intention at this stage. I feel like their intention is to get in the space and see what happens. Kind of what Apple does sometimes. So we've got that coming next year. And that's going to be a big one for developers. Anytime there's a new platform to work on and either migrate our apps and tools or start something completely new that we haven't even envisioned yet, is going to be an opportunity. And we'll see how that goes and how that plays out. That's going to be fascinating, especially given that a lot of the conversations that folks want to have with those who have been to the sessions can't really have those conversations and that information because it's all under NDA still. Totally understand that. So we're going to see what happens in the first quarter, and it's going to be very interesting one way or another. Certainly no doubt in my mind that obviously WWDC next year, it's going to be all about that. it's going to be all about the headset. That's a given, I think. As far as the Apple computers, of course, we'll see those progressions like we do every year. We very recently got the M3 chip. It's only natural we're going to see that built into other hardware as well. But perhaps the other interesting aspect here is this late breaker in 2023 of Apple, getting in trouble with some of the hardware, some of the sensors in their Apple Watch and having to remove that from the market, which is pretty much unprecedented, I think, as far as Apple goes. However, the latest that I'm hearing is that there's now a block in place that says they can continue to sell it while it's being appealed. So we'll see what happens there, which in my mind is all a bit weird too, right? It's very peculiar to me that you would wait to appeal it and before that announce and to pull the watch from the stores a couple of days before that announcement, which in some ways to me makes me stop and think maybe they're taking advantage of this a little bit to boost sales, right? All those people who think it's not going to be available, so they run out and order and purchase one for a couple of days because it's not going to be available, and then sure enough, next thing you know, it's available again. I'm not saying that's what they did, but hey, I know of more than a few folks who have said that they went and ordered a watch because they weren't sure if it was going to be available again. And so it's paid off that way for Apple in some ways, right? Hey, like I say, not promoting any conspiracy theories here, but it is interesting that they allowed it to not be available for a couple of days before appealing it and saying, hey, you know what? We're lucky we got this injunction. Now we can sell it again. It's just all very interesting timing, I think, for a massive company like Apple to do something like that. Moving on from there, next year, I think it's going to be interesting with the software and the operating systems. It was very much a progressive bug fix year, I think, for these releases. So we'll see what happens. I would be very happy to see another one of those releases next year. I do love it when we get these incremental releases that don't have many big new features and really focus down on fixing the bugs and getting things nice and smooth. It's been a bit rough this year for me on the operating systems. iOS for me has been a bit rough in the sense of my iPhone seems to have randomly restarted itself this year way more than any other year that I can recall, going back to the iPhone 3G when I first got one. So that's very peculiar. The watch, I think, was a good year for Apple Watch operating system. All feels very good. My iPad has been good too. But again, iPadOS has been a little glitchy for me this year. I have not felt as confident with it as I have in previous years. macOS has been pretty good. I've had some problems, but I actually don't think they're the operating system. I think it's more down to third-party extensions causing a little bit of instability there. So we'll see what happens. But interestingly, I do want to say, and I guess in some ways confess, he says jokingly, I've been using Windows a little bit more this year. But I want to put that in context. I have been using Windows more for game development more than anything else, especially the Epic Unreal Engine. It just runs better on my PC than it does on my M1 Mac. Not to say that it's slow or anything like that on my M1 Mac, but I just don't like the way the heat and the fans spin up on the Mac when I'm using game development tools like Unity and Unreal Engine and those kind of things. So I tend to use my PC more for those because it just seems to handle them better. I don't know if that'll be a thing that we see change down the road. It's just an interesting observation that I want to put out there. And going into next year, for my personal plans, I released a new app and a new game this year, and 2 events, one of which is still ongoing right now for Endless Hurdles. the Christmas event. I achieved my goals to get those out there. Not sure what I'm going to set my goals for from a development perspective for next year, but I do want to look into Swift data specifically as something. And I am working on maybe some courses that I might release. We'll see. Definitely something I'm thinking about because I'm working on a Godot game course right now. And I'm wondering if I wait and see what the results are like from that and how it's received. And I might start thinking about doing some Swift ones. We'll see. I don't know. But it's going to be interesting to see on that. Thing with those is they take a long time to produce. And at this point, anything that I'm working on could be redundant or radically changed by the time we get to June and WWDC. Just a few thoughts in this episode. Just an end of year wrap there to say what happened and where I think it's going from not just my perspective, the areas around what we do and the platforms that we work with. And to start next year, just want to put this out there for folks. If you would like to come on the podcast and something to talk about, go to compileswift.com/contact. Always looking forward to talking to folks and having them come on and talk about things. Always great conversations, and I just love doing that. And again, I have been so lucky to have so many wonderful guests this year. That's always an open invitation for any listener and anybody out there. Doesn't matter if you're making a one-person app that's a small app or some massive platform or framework or whatever it may be, some tool, some service. Always fascinated to talk about those things. So I think I'm going to wrap it there. I hope it's been a great year, development year for you. And I hope that you're going to take some time off at the end of the year like I have. And I'm not looking to get back into the flow of things until January. It's nice to have that reset and just sit back and let the schedules drop a little bit for a few days and just make the most of the relaxation and get that mindset ready for next year. If this podcast has been helpful to you this year, hey, I'd love if you would say thank you and buy me a coffee. You don't have to, but if you want to go to peterwitham.com/BMC, or in the show notes, there's a link to buy me a coffee and help support the content. It would be greatly appreciated. I have incurred a lot of expenses this year, hosting and tools for a lot of these things. It's not free to produce, but I do try to keep things free and out there for everybody. So anyway, another thing you can do is leave reviews. Thank you again to everybody that's been leaving the reviews and ratings this year. It makes a difference. It truly does make a difference. So I hope you have a wonderful end of the year, and I will be speaking to you in 2024.